Welcome back. We are the Brothers Mahoney. I am Michael,
And I'm James.
and today we are discussing The Masque of Mandragora. This is a Tom Baker story with Sarah Jane Smith, written by Louis Marks, and aired in September 1976 in 4 episodes, which also, on a side note, opened season 14 of the classic Doctor Who series.
Yeah, so this one's fun because it's actually our first review, multiple episodes in, of a Tom Baker story. And
It-
and both of us quite enjoy the Fourth Doctor, so and he has so many stories, so it's kind of surprising.
Yeah, Tom Baker is naturally one of the, for a lot of people, it's one of the first doctors people think of. In fact, our father was a big Tom Baker fan. So it's sort of funny that I think he's one of the last doctors, aside from, of course, the eighth doctor being Paul McGann, that we are talking about. Aside, of course, of the doctors in the revival series, past Christopher Eccleston.
Yes, and they'll be fun to get to as well, but that's going to take our own sweet time there. Although we're almost halfway through the season, so I mean that's not
that
nothing.
that is true. So the Masque of Mandragora, to quote the back of the DVD copy we have, after an encounter with the Dali Mandragora helix, the Doctor and Sarah Jane land in 15th century San Martino. In the midst of danger, secrecy, and intrigue, they witness the flowering of the Italian Renaissance. As the masque to celebrate the ascension of the new Duke of San Martino approaches, the Doctor realizes that a third visitor has arrived with him in the TARDIS. It is a force with the power to wipe out human civilization forever. The Doctor has brought it to Earth, and only the Doctor can stop it.
Yeah, I think I said this before for another one, probably the Dominators, but I'll say it for this one as well. That plot sounds a hell of a lot cooler on the back of the DVD than the actual story was. I guess
Yeah,
we can.
actually, it might have been Spear from Space, because I remember you bringing that up then too.
Yeah, but there's a big difference, at least for me, in that I personally like Spare from Space a lot more. It's unfortunate this is the first time biggest story we're talking about, because on the whole, I found this one maybe not boring, but certainly not even in. I don't think it's even in the top half of Tom Baker's stories that he brought during his time as the Doctor.
Yeah, I quite like Tom Baker's Doctor, but this story now, this is the second time we have seen it. We've mentioned previously that we have seen a lot, if not most, of the classic Who stories before, and we have seen this one before also. So it's the second time that we've seen it. But even so, despite enjoying Tom Baker as the Doctor, this one did feel a bit, I don't know, dry maybe. It didn't seem to have that much going for it, really. I mean, it's not a, I wouldn't say it's a bad story.
Yeah, I could put this in and watch it, just to watch something. But it's not something that would really invest me too much. I mean, the thing is, I quite like the cast of this. All the main characters were perfectly adequate and even great in their roles. We had Gareth Armstrong playing Giuliano, who is the new soon-to-be Duke of San Martino after his father was poisoned, it turns out. There is Tim Pigott Smith playing Malco, who is a lifelong friend and not servant, but someone very close to Giuliano, who was really a very strong role, maybe one of my favorites in the story, honestly. He had some good standout scenes. John Larimore played Count Federico, a kind of stereotypical but an evil uncle of Giuliano who wanted the dukedom to himself, and in fact is one of the people in the plot who poisoned Giuliano's father, which I suppose would probably be his brother now that I think about it, and that's not good. And lastly, we have another top contender for maybe my favorite character in this, Norman Jones, who plays the glorious Hieronymus, who has a few secrets up his sleeve. One of those secrets being poison, but that's certainly not all of them.
Yeah, and the interesting thing about Hieronymus, and one of the reasons that this story, I think, even though it's not good, it can be entertaining. There's sort of a idea in the story, a theme of enlightenment versus superstition. Because Hieronymus is big into astrology. He's sort of the well, it's his official position, like the court sorcerer.
I think he might have been the court astrologer.
He advised the Duke on matters of astrology, reading the stars, saying, "Hey, when the moon of Jupiter is looking at the moon of Saturn, things will begin to happen. Now, he probably did it more convincing than I just did.
I would hope so, because both Saturn and Jupiter have more than one moon. But
there you go.
And I guess, I mean, I don't think we should have to say this, to be quite frank. I don't believe in astrology.
Well, I believe it's a thing.
Okay, yes, I believe it exists, but I don't believe it has any significance.
That is a typical Scorpio opinion.
Yeah. Astrology's never really been my thing. Most superstitious things have not usually been my thing. And one of my favorite things about this is twofold. One, he was part of the plot with Count Federico to kill the former Duke, and then later on, it doesn't take too many episodes, to start plotting to kill Giuliano. Because, of course, Federico and Hieronymus are in kind of an alliance. And so what would happen was Hieronymus would just come with a proclamation. He would just make something completely up. I think he did seem like he was kind of into it, but Count Federico would have Hieronymus make something up, like, the 7th moon of Jupiter is in the 7th shade of Saturn. I use the same planets you did. There are no other planets now. I don't worry about that. But he'd make something up and say, because of this, your life is in danger. And he said that to the Duke, who, of course, was poisoned by Count Federico and Hieronymus. So he uses it to cover up their own murder plot. And you can just say, oh no, it's foretold by the stars, it wasn't me. It's actually kind of a bit like, not to go into spoiler territory, honestly, it's a bit like Stannis and Ranley in the second book of Clash of Kings, where Melisandre's horse Tick, and we're not a Game of Thrones podcast, so I'm going to keep this really short, though I am a huge fan of the series. But where Melisandre, says, if we go to this field, Ranley will die, or something to that effect. And so Stannis goes to the field, seeming not to realize that the only reason that Ranley dies is because he was there at the field. I'm not explaining it very well, but it's a very good stuff. You should read those books. After watching Doctor Who, of course. That's a great way to spend the time. But my other favorite thing about this is that as much as they're in an alliance, Count Federico doesn't believe any of the bullshit Hieronymus is spouting. It's funny, Giuliano doesn't believe it either. He thinks Hieronymus is a fraud. And Count Federico, who's, Hieronymus' husband, also thinks he's a fraud. He doesn't care about astrology at all. He just, uses it, to back his own plots. He's very openly derisive against Hieronymus, and it's amusing every single time because Hieronymus takes it so seriously when Count Federico just believes it's all bullshit. I just find a very funny dynamic that these two are working together when they basically hate each other on a personal level.
And naturally, the Doctor doesn't believe in astrology either. He's seen way too much, experienced way too much, even at this point, to have any respect for that type of fortune telling.
I do have to say, we don't really need to explain to somebody that doesn't believe in astrology, because I'm sorry if I'm finding anybody believes in astrology out there, but I'll just take it as no one would need to explain to me why they don't believe in astrology. I'll phrase it that way. Certainly not an alien time traveler.
Which is actually a nice segue, because the first, 6 minutes of this serial, of this story, was quite interesting. Because the Doctor and Sarah Jane, they're sort of exploring the TARDIS, and hey, we get introduced to another, what was it called, the spare TARDIS console room?
Backup console, I don't remember exactly what, the secondary console room perhaps. This was a console room that, again, we've seen these before, but I have always found it extremely strange. It has the normal TARDIS console room layout, except it's all made of dark wood. It's very bizarre to see. And I know they, I think, only kept it around for one season. Every time I see it, I find it so unusual. But yeah, no, the Doctor and Sarah are just walking around the TARDIS. I don't think there's any reason. They're just messing around. And the Doctor runs into the room and he's like, oh, I could control the TARDIS from this room. Everything works just fine. And so then I think they just use this room for the rest of the season.
I mean, hey, that's as good as a reason as any.
I guess so. I guess they wanted to use, I don't know. I'm sure there was some reason that they decided to change the setup. But yeah, I believe they go back to the normal one next season. I don't think they had to remake another set, but maybe they did. I guess we'll get there when we get there.
Shortly after finding this new console room that they start using, they, being, of course, again, the Doctor and Sarah Jane, see sort of what seems like living energy in the time vortex, which is apparently the Mandragora helix. Seems to be some type of, I don't know if I even want to say malevolent, but some type of powerful entity.
Certainly some type of force.
And they being the TARDIS, are drawn into it, and they end up in a sort of void type area. And by void, I mean it was totally black. Like
kind of like in the diamond type shape.
Yeah,
it's hard to explain. I will certainly pay a picture up to to show this, but yeah, it's very unusual. I don't know how convincing it was, but certainly a way to open an episode.
Yeah, some of the visuals during Tom Baker's time weren't the strongest. Now, we don't usually care as much about that type of thing as other people might. They did what they could, but it certainly looked unique. And the whole story started differently because, again, this is just like a 6-minute scene. While they encounter this energy force. When they go outside, they leave the door open, and this force is able to get into the TARDIS. So when the Doctor and Sarah Jane are able to leave, one apparently did a thing to check to see if anything got in the TARDIS.
I mean, they were behind it at the time, so I guess there's no way they could check. And the TARDIS is big; it could easily have went to hiding.
Yeah, I'm just surprised that there's no type of mechanism in the TARDIS that sort of warns the Doctor that, hey, there's something else here that maybe you should know about.
Maybe the TARDIS wasn't in a state of temporal grace.
That is a good excuse.
Yeah, I know the TARDIS kind of does what it needs to for whatever story it needs to. That's I guess the joys of the TARDIS. Although this is one of the few problems, as I get to, that kind of would have been cast if not for the Doctor. Because usually the Doctor intervenes in things that are already on the way. But in this case, I mean, I guess it was kind of part of the Mandragora Helix's plan. But in this case, he did need the TARDIS to get to this area. So
yeah, naturally, like we said, they land in 15th century San Martino, and that's when things happen. And actually, one really interesting thing about this story is the location. Now, naturally, San Martino is in Italy, but it was, of course, filmed not in Italy. It was filmed in Wales, in a city known as Port Marion. Now, Port Marion is somewhat well known for being the filming location of a TV series called The Prisoner, which is a late 60s TV series.
Yeah, neither Michael nor I have any experience with this series.
Yeah, I did at one time consider watching it, but it's just something I never got to. Life is indeed a fleeting thing. But the city of Port Marion has a very unique look to it. Now, I'm not an architecture guy. I can't explain buildings and architecture. It's not who I am. But watching this, it did look to me like it could have been filmed in a Mediterranean location like Italy. And I think that really added, I can't say a lot to the story, but much like Planet of Fire, which is a Peter Davison story, the location did certainly have a unique feel to it, and I do think it helped with this story.
Yeah, it certainly did elevate the story in my eyes. It made it a lot more, I don't know, something about the architecture is kind of inviting. It's kind of, if this took place in the UK, I realize this was filmed in the UK, but if this took place in the UK, like a normal thing, like maybe the Time Warrior, we would have had, dreary-looking castles on hillsides, which have their own cool aesthetic, but, that's kind of what you're used to. But in this, all the architecture inside of, castles, they look like palaces. It wasn't quite like what you'd expect, Middle Eastern, but, as it wasn't what you'd usually see, in a normal, London, old-style London story. So I don't know, I thought it was really fun. I thought the location looked really good overall. And I do think that helped the story a lot. I think if I was actually rating these, I would get a whole point, maybe even 2, just for the location alone.
Yeah, and not only do they have a nice location, they also have nice cults. Specifically, the cult of Damnos, which apparently at this point in time has thought to have died out, but apparently came from like 3rd century Roman times, which is a cult worshipping, well, naturally Damnos, which works to the Mandragora's benefit.
Yes, it does. So, spoilers. I don't know if Damnos actually exists. I suppose he probably did. But the way that he existed was... It's kind of awkward, honestly, for this cult. Damnos existed as a servant of the Mandragora's helix. So imagine if you worshipped a god all your life, and it turns out that god was just a servant of another being. I would think, I mean, it wasn't addressed in this story, but I would think that would be very disheartening for you to realize that you're just worshipping a middleman manager when you could have been worshipping corporate all along. Which sounds horrifying, by the way. Don't worship corporate. That's no god. Again, it did come up. I just found that kind of hilarious at that reveal.
Yeah, and because of there is a pre-existing cult in the area, Mandragora is able to use that cult to... God, what was he even trying to do?
He was trying to do something. I have to admit, I didn't really get its plan, to be quite frank. That's part of what hurts this story in my eyes. So there's going to be a lunar eclipse on the evening of Giuliano's ascension to dukedom, which is, we need more dukes. That's a fun word to say. But there's going to be a lunar eclipse, and there was some ancient prophecy about when something swallows the moon. And so the power of the helix amplified by the members of the cult or something to that nature, basically was somehow going to remove all sense of purpose from mankind, which basically will get rid of
ambition.
Ambition and I'm thinking, cognitive thought, planning, figuring out the world. It's basically the anti-Renaissance, which fits in with the story theme. Instead of trying to figure out how the world works, we would just, I suppose, revert to our bestial natures. Now, I have to be frank, I have no idea what the how the Mandragora gains from this. Maybe it's sad, but I don't frankly think it was ever made quite plain. But I'll tell you what, I don't think that was predicted. I don't think the cult knew that was the angle they were working towards.
Yeah, and it works in the story because to witness the ascension of Giuliano to becoming a duke, a lot of people... Well, let me back this up a little. Like we mentioned, Giuliano does not think much of superstition. He's a very rational thinker, very rational man, and he has a deep respect for the ongoing Renaissance. So he invited a lot of people from the Renaissance, such as Leonardo da Vinci, to witness his ascension to dukedom. And all of those people he invited are threatened by this force and by this cult because naturally they're right next to them and they're going to get God.
Yeah, and the fun thing about it is, it's a nice thing we learn. I believe it's at the beginning of episode 2, so it's not too spoilery. That the leader of this cult is none other than the cult astrologer Hieronymus. And I'm not quite sure what Mandragora's reasoning was, but at the very least, Hieronymus had a reason for supporting Mandragora, even after it was revealed that Damnos was just basically a servant of Mandragora. According to Hieronymus, if mankind's ambition is left unchecked, it will spread into the galaxy, which is true. We see then later stories that mankind does go out, enslaves Oods, the normal things humans do. And it would rival the power of Mandragora. I guess that was probably Mandragora's aim also. He didn't want anything to rival his power. Now, it seemed pretty powerful, and you would think it could, worry, I don't know, about the dialects. You'd think there's other things to worry about than 15th century Earth, but I guess, it can have multiple plans going on at once.
One other somewhat amusing thing is that Hieronymus was the leader of this cult, and Count Federico had literally no idea. Like, he knew the cult existed. Everybody knew the cult was trolling about.
And the funny thing is, Count Federico was using the cult basically as an excuse to be a dick. If he was in modern days, he would have been a corrupt policeman. Basically, he went around terrorizing villagers for seemingly no reason, with the excuse that the cult exists and he needed to, do what he could to wipe the cult out. So in another way, Hieronymus was kind of helping him. But I'm sure that one wasn't intentional.
Yeah, it's amusing to me because, like we said, Count Federico and Hieronymus are allies, but neither one has much respect for the other one. And Count Federico looks down on Hieronymus quite a bit. And again, doesn't believe he has any power to himself. And all this time, Hieronymus has his own cult to do his bidding. It's just a sort of funny look at what power these people actually have in relation to each other. Which actually, if they focused a little more on that, it might have been a little more interesting.
Yeah, no, I would have liked a lot more of it focused more on the court intrigue than some scary, powerful force from the skies.
Yeah, but Sarah Jane almost becomes a sacrifice twice, so that's always good.
This was not Sarah Jane's story. See, if this had been her first story, I don't think she would have stayed.
And actually, there's sort of this is really a big focus. At one point in the story, Sarah Jane sort of gets taken over, hypnotized, and she asks, under this hypnotism, the doctor, how is it that they're able to understand and communicate with people despite the fact that this is 15th century Italy? To which the doctor replies, it's a, quote, Time Lord's gift that I allow Sarah Jane to share with him.
Yeah, it's a far cry from it being part of the translation matrix of the TARDIS, which frankly makes more sense to me anyway. Because, I mean, a Time Lord's gift. I get that Time Lords have some semblance of psychicness, and probably anything they want to have, because, they are Time Lords. But yeah, it makes a lot more sense for them, to be connected to the TARDIS. But, it's fine. It's the first time they wanted to address the question.
So I found, and I'll touch more on the communication thing in a second, but what I find sort of funny about that, because Sarah Jane asked that question, the doctor realized that she was hypnotized, that she wasn't herself. So in a way, the doctor is sort of saying, oh, Sarah Jane's not usually that inquisitive. Something must be wrong. Which, it's not meant as an insult, but I find it funny, especially because Sarah Jane's supposed to be an investigative journalist, and she never thought to ask the doctor, hey, how can we understand, this species or these people? And the fact that she asks is so out of character, the doctor immediately realizes that she's hypnotized is amusing to me.
Not only was she hypnotized in this story, but she was also dragged twice, now that I think about it. It was right before the ceremonial sacrifice that she was supposed to be the sacrifice for. They dragged her at the Cult of Dimnos. So, again, it was just not her story. And she was almost, because of the hypnotism, she almost ended up killing the doctor. Now, of course, the doctor knew all along that she had been hypnotized. As Maggie said, he figured out as soon as she asked that question. And of course, he just played along as you would expect the doctor to do. But she did have good times in Italy, I would say so. And she also ended up in a torture dance, now that I think about it.
Hey, but luckily they outed, so it's not just on her.
This is true. At least she didn't have that fate alone. She had others to share it with.
Yeah, one of those characters, of course, being Malgo, who James mentioned previously was played by Tim Pidgett Smith. And that character was a very loyal friend to Giuliano. The complete nature of the relationship is touched upon. All we know is that despite the fact that Giuliano is, of course, going to be the rightful Duke of San Martino, it really seems like Malgo is one of the only people he actually trusts. Like, all of the guards, and it sort of makes sense because Count Federico is in control of the guards, so that's one of his positions. But all the guards are, of course, in a way sort of supporting Count Federico's claim to take power. So Giuliano doesn't really have many people he can trust. Malgo's pretty much one of the only ones. And he's quite a fun character. He's captured later on in the story and tortured. The idea is that Count Federico is trying to force him, amusingly, trying to force him to claim that Giuliano is actually the leader of the cult. Which then, if he would say that, they can say, oh, hey, Giuliano's a cult leader. He can't be the Duke. And even under torture, I would say that Malgo holds up pretty well.
Yeah, I think he did eventually say it, but I mean, we did get to see the torture. Of course, we did get to see the torture. So I'm sure he held out for as long as he could because he was being quite loyal to him.
And actually, mentioning the guards, this was a somewhat action-packed story. It wasn't. It's not. This isn't a John Porty story. There wasn't like massive 10-minute fights, but there was a pretty decent sword fight. Giuliano can fight with a sword, and naturally the Doctor. We've seen previously that the Doctor can use a sword, and the Sea Devils, he has what seems like a 15-minute fight with the Master.
The problem with that sword fight, I think it was actually a fun scene. And that's they probably walk their swords. But the problem with that fight was not only was it shown once at the end of whichever episode it was also shown completely in full at the start of the next episode. So it seemed like it was a good and they, and it was a long fight anyway, because it was John Porty, he liked doing stuff like that. So it was probably a good, honestly, at least 8 minutes. 8 minutes of the same sword fight. And when we, just nice little background for us, when we watch these series, we do not fast forward until we get to the new stuff. We just, let the episode play out, and whatever it shows at the beginning, we just watch again. However, for that one, it is a bit much, admittedly.
Yeah, so we have seen the Doctor use a sword before. And we actually see the Fourth Doctor doing the same again later on. In the Key to Time, there's a story, The Androids of Terror, which also has from what my recollection, has a pretty decent sword fight toward the end of it, so that was fun. But we see the Doctor in this story helping Giuliano when some guardsmen attack him, which again is funny, because keep in mind that Giuliano is supposed to be the leader of this land, and the guards, because they're working with Count Frederico, are ordered to attack and kill him.
And they didn't seem to have any second thoughts about it. It's literally an assassination in broad daylight. Now, granted, it was in a very rural area. It's not like it happened in the middle of the city. But, I mean, he just told his guards, now's the time, kill him. And these guards who are supposed to, give loyalty to Giuliano, all are like, okay. I mean, those aren't guards you want to keep around.
Yeah, luckily the Doctor was there, and he had a sword, and he was quite handy with it. It was a nice little action-packed sequence.
Yeah, I mean, not only that, but there was a scene where the Doctor is killed in execution by jumping on a horseback after tackling the guard. So the Doctor got some pretty good action scenes in this one. And
there's even one toward the end. This is actually a really fun sequence. So while Sarah Jane is hypnotized, she was given a poisoned needle by Hieronymus to kill the Doctor with. Hieronymus had his own issues with the Doctor. And of course, this was probably also in conjunction with the Witches of the Mandragora. So Sarah Jane was supposed to kill the Doctor. So while the Doctor is dealing with that, Count Federico wants Hieronymus kicked out of the castle. He has become disenchanted with his works. So long story short, the Doctor and Sarah Jane go down to face off with Hieronymus. And it's during that scene that Sarah Jane is sort of encouraged by Hieronymus to kill the Doctor. She has like an extraordinarily creepy smile on her face. It's like something you'd see in an exorcism movie. It's legitimately creepy. And she had the needle, and she is, of course, going to stab the Doctor. And then there's a sequence of events in which Hieronymus gets a needle himself that he's going to stab the Doctor with. The Doctor then, in a quick motion, kicks the needle out of Hieronymus's hand.
Yeah, our guards are busting in to throw, of course, Hieronymus out.
Yeah, it's a very busy sequence. There's a lot going on in that specifically that like 1 minute sequence. Hieronymus and Sarah Jane are sort of trying to kill the Doctor, then guards bust in to kick Hieronymus out. And then Hieronymus is able to escape because he throws down some like smoke pallet or something. I think Javal did the exact same thing in Aladdin, actually. Just threw down some smoke pallet type thing and is able to escape in the confusion. But it's a very busy and yet fun sequence, and actually maybe, in my opinion, one of the most enjoyable sequences in the story.
Yeah, I'd say it was the most enjoyable. Because we rewatched it a couple of times, it was just fun because the Doctor just... I don't watch martial arts or anything, so I don't know what type of kick it was. He seemingly pulled both feet off the ground. Now, he didn't use both feet to kick, but the way it was framed, it looked like he did a jump. He kicked out with one foot while he was, while jumping. It was just fun. It was nice to see the Doctor being all actiony. Which is, strange because that got rather boring with Pottery. But that's because that's a lot of what Pottery did was science and action. But that's not really how Baker's style is. Baker just annoys people, basically. But in this one, he took a lot of physical actions instead of, just talking. And to be fair, there's not too many people for him to talk to in this one.
And I think that probably helped a little bit because, like I said, this story seems a bit dry to me. It's only 4 episodes. It's just a 4-part story. Most Tom Baker's stories were around 4 episodes. So it's not like it was particularly any more lengthy than any other Tom Baker story. But it just felt somewhat dry. The material wasn't exactly exciting. Or maybe it's just that the story wasn't executed correctly. But it felt dry. So seeing some more action sequences, being the Doctor having to deal with Hieronymus and Sarah Jane attempting to kill him, or him sword fighting with Giuliano against a bunch of guards. At least something happened. It was sort of fun to watch that, because otherwise I wasn't deeply enamored by a lot of things going on.
Yeah, it's strange because I liked the cast by and large. I liked the setting. It's just, see, this is the thing. The story is what brings it down. And the problem is that it wasn't even the story so much as the antagonist, because one of the things about this story for me is the Mandragora Helix. I don't know who the voice actor was, but it was a very monotonous voice, a very slow, monotonous voice they decided to give the Helix.
And if you're wondering why this entity is speaking at all, when it sort of took over the cult for its own needs. He's sort of giving an address to the cult, and when he's speaking to the cult, his voice is extraordinarily monotone. And actually, I described it when we were watching. I described it to James as stupor-inducing. And I was somewhat tired already when we started watching this story, trying to watch the scene in which the Mandragora Helix is speaking to the cult. God, I can't say I did not feel entirely drowsy after that. That was just hard to get through.
Yeah, I think he spoke for a good, minute and a half and probably got 4 sentences in. Because that's how slow the entity spoke. But yeah, this was no Sutak where you could just hear the gleeful mirth in his voice. And there's no Omega where you can hear the pain of, what he's gone through and the madness that, he has acquired after centuries of isolation. This is nowhere near those levels of greatness. And it's no insult to the voice actor. They, obviously decided to go for a more impersonal, and I get it, it's, an energy thing. I don't think it's going to have feelings, really. But that also means that we can't be blamed for not finding the most interesting voice to listen to.
It does sort of play into perhaps one of the more memorable lines of the serial, because toward the end, the Doctor is sort of mocking the way that the Helix speaks. And he says the ever classic line, "I would not say no to a salami sandwich."
Not only was that amusing, and I believe it became a meme on Twitch for a while now that I think about it, but not only was that amusing, at the next scene we see Giuliano, who did survive, spoilers, but I mean he was the Duke, so it's probably going to happen. We see Giuliano hand him a roll of salami. so I guess he got his wish.
Yeah, and actually toward the end, when the Doctor is sort of doing a showdown with the Helix, and I should say we don't really see that showdown in detail. I would argue actually the ending somewhat anticlimactic.
Yeah, I really like we're not going to go into it, but I don't think we are. I really like the way that they're beaten, but I agree that it's slightly anticlimactic, certain how we got to the point where they were beaten, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so when the Doctor is doing a showdown with the Helix, he says something to the effect that, quote, "A Time Lord's job is to insist on justice for our species," which I thought was a bit rich coming from the Doctor. And if that is indeed the Time Lord's job, I just think the second Doctor, Patrick Troughton, got majorly screwed.
Oh yeah, it's interesting because you can almost follow a story arc if you watch the Gallifrey-centric stories. Because even after, of course, the first regeneration of the second Doctor into, of course, the third Doctor, the fourth one, yeah, he was annoyed by the Time Lords. Obviously, he was annoyed by the Time Lords, but he didn't see them as anything more than annoying, inefficient bureaucrats, basically. Now, of course, he wanted to get along with them, but, he didn't see them too poorly. And that's even after there was a Time Lord teaming up with the Master to, I believe, frame him in the Deadly Assassin. Now, then the fifth Doctor comes along. They try to execute the fifth Doctor for not no reason, but he's innocent of any crime. They're just going to be planning on executing him in Arc of Infinity. Then, of course, the sixth Doctor comes along, and the whole plot is revealed in the Trial of a Time Lord about the mysterious planet and what that planet was. And then I think that's when the Doctor finally realizes, oh wait, these guys are just bureaucrats, they really suck. So I guess that's kind of a fun arc you could, watch during that. But yeah, during this time, I guess the Doctor's still perhaps loyal to the idea of Time Lords. But that's a strange idea anyway, because as we discussed in the Three Doctors, I thought the entire thing of Time Lords was non-intervention. Like, what do they care about justice to our races? I thought the entire point would be to, not intervene. I suppose...
And of course, and that's exactly why they executed the second Doctor.
Yeah, because he intervened too much. And it's strange. I guess they always, intervene to a point, because we see in the Invasion of Time, they had maybe not transit system, but then, we're watching, the galactic travels, to and from the southern sector in space. I do remember that scene specifically. So they pay attention.
I mean, they like knowing things. They just like
I just wonder what their self-defined limits would be when it comes to things like intervention. Because I never got the feeling that the Time Lords cared about justice.
Or at least the idea of justice differs dramatically from what we might think as justice.
Yeah, this is true. And now on to my favorite section of the show where I ramble for a bit. No, but timelines. I like using the TARDIS wiki. They have personal timelines for each Doctor. Fits in all types of media from the comic books.
And just to clarify, the idea of the personal timeline is to fit every single Doctor Who media for each personal Doctor into a timeline. So, for instance, all the Tom Baker stories from the classic Who, and then all of his comic book appearances, and then any Big Finish audio that might have Tom Baker in it, trying to fit all of that into one cohesive timeline to make sense of it all.
Yeah, which, as you can imagine, is barely possible, but people have tried, and you can find this on the TARDIS wiki. I think they're quite fun to go through. It helps you learn about maybe things you didn't know about. So this, of course, came out in between the Seeds of Doom and the Hand of Fear, and more specifically, it came out in between a Big Finish audio called Collector's Item, which is already a strange audio name, but it was one of the subscribers search strips, which these are things you get. You can't buy most of them solo. You have to be subscribed to the main range, I believe, of Doctor Who, doing it for a certain... I don't really know the subscription service works. We haven't used that quite yet. But you just have to be subscribed during a certain era of the Big Finish. And then when you get a certain story for, the discount that you get from being subscribed, you also get another quasi-free, even though you got it because of the subscription, story along with the download. And this was one of those. And this came out 2017, so it takes place right before the glories of the Masque of Mandragora. And right after this is a very interesting thing as well. So I'm not going to go into all of it, but apparently in 1976, in schoolrooms all across the UK, they got the joy of Exploration Earth. They got the joys of listening to a radio thing, I think made for the schools. It was sciencey. Each episode dealt with a science issue that they got to learn about. I guess it's better than watching Remember the Titans 3 different times in the same bloody school year. But that's US education for you.
Hey, that's all we have to know about racism. Just remember the Titans.
Yeah, or they could, saw the police.
Oh, snap, it's getting real up in this.
Yeah. But the third episode of this Exploration Earth was they just got the actors from Doctor Who. They got Tom Baker and Elisabeth Sladen. And they just did. It's a very short, it's only 22 minutes or so. Maybe even less. So it's about the length of a normal Doctor Who episode and even a bit less than that. Just a short story that they do things, and I have no idea about the plot. I try not to read too much into these plots because eventually we do want to talk about even these really random things. But yeah, this was a 1976 radio broadcast. In fact, it was the first original story of Doctor Who that was done as a radio broadcast. They had previously done a story, but I think it was an adaptation, although I couldn't tell you off the top of my head what it was an adaptation of. But so it was the first one, so that's, interesting for historical purposes. But yeah, so this takes place in between those two very random pieces of Doctor Who media.
Yeah, and that's always where my interest comes in. Yeah, it's fascinating to learn where a story takes place in the Doctor's personal timeline. But when you throw in things like, radio broadcasts from the 1970s or any of the random miscellaneous books, it always gets more interesting. And this one, I think, is probably one of the most interesting surrounding stories we've talked about so far.
Yeah, because, no one's going to... unless you're a huge Doctor Who fan, how the hell are you going to know about a random 22-minute broadcast from 1976? It's not really something I was ever going to know about, except if I looked through this timeline for this specific reason, so...
And actually, it's also worth mentioning, I would imagine that could be found on YouTube if you're interested in listening to it.
Yes, I believe I ran into it on YouTube. I listened to a minute of it, confirmed that it was, in fact, what it said it was, and then I let it go. It might be one of those things that pops up and down on YouTube as some things do, but, it might stay. Who knows? Either way, it's interesting and just for historical reasons, if nothing else. Because, of course, I can't vouch for, the story.
As far as the Masque of Mandragora goes, though, I remember the first time I watched it, it didn't really stand out to me. So I was interested in revisiting it, seeing if I liked it anymore, maybe liked it any less. And I think I came out pretty much about the same. There are some good things in it, like James mentioned. I think the cast is pretty strong. Gareth Armstrong playing Juliana is a pretty strong character. Tim Pigott-Smith playing Margot, another strong character as antagonistic forces. John Lorimore as Count Federico was pretty solid. Norman Jones as Hieronymus, another good character. The themes I thought were decently strong. It was the idea of enlightenment versus superstition. No, that was never like a really big focus, but it was definitely relevant throughout the story, so that was nice. And again, the filming location being Port Merion in Wales, it looked really nice. It looked good, but the overall story just felt somewhat dry to me. I wasn't particularly invested in the whole astrological things going on. I mean, there's a scene when the doctor is sort of deciphering like a scroll of dates or something.
Yeah, to see exactly, because he had overheard Hieronymus and Mandragora discussing their plans, and he was trying to figure out what the plans were and why it mattered so much that it's going to be happening on this one night. So, I mean, that's fun, but it is, after all, just the doctor reading scrolls while Sarah Jane is just quietly standing in the corner.
Yeah, and there was a somewhat decent death count toward the end. I mean, the whole story is called The Masque of Mandragora. Toward the end of the story, there is a mask ball being held by Giuliano.
Yeah, though I must admit it was the most unlikely mask I've ever seen.
Yeah, but it was pretty good death count though, because a lot of people got like taken down by the cult. The cult was sort of surrounding the castle, and then they came in. I don't think it was executed particularly well, but it was a cool idea.
Yeah, it's one of those things. Again, if they had focus more on the court intrigue and the idea of a cult surrounding the home of a duke, that's interesting stuff. But when you throw in a plan that, I mean, I don't really see how humans could compete with the Mandragora Helix, but apparently he was worried about that.
Even if they could, there has to be things that you have to be more concerned about than human beings.
I mean, I guess the idea was that there was some astrological basis to it because he could only do it at this certain time. I think he had to do it in 500-year intervals or something to that effect. And also, it's interesting to note, even though I didn't love this story either, I thought it was very milquetoast, rather bland. Even with, all the gold pouch in it, the whole doesn't work for me. The Mandragora Helix actually shows up in some Doctor Who novels. I'm not going to say which ones because I don't know, it might be spoilers. It might, be a nice surprise. You're reading and, the enemy is the Mandragora Helix. And so I'm not going to ruin that for you. But I just find it fascinating that even a story like this, and this is what I like about expanded media, even a story like this, which I've never seen make anybody's top lists, but even this one, they decide, some writer decides to bring back the Mandragora Helix just, for fun. And apparently 2 writers chose to. So, I mean, I guess that's something. But yeah, overall, even though it's the first Tom Baker story we're discussing, it's certainly not the best. And in fact, I wouldn't be surprised if this would be in my top 10 least favorite Tom Baker stories. Because honestly, Tom Baker has so many good ones.
Yeah, even ones that some people don't generally like. One that immediately comes to mind is Underworld. Now, again, we've only seen Underworld once, and I have to admit, I don't remember much about it. And that one generally doesn't get good ratings, but at the same time, there's a story, The Robots of Death. Another one we've only seen once, and I actually don't remember much about it, and that one gets extraordinarily high ratings. So it's going to be interesting revisiting a lot of these.
Yeah, and being able to solidify our thoughts about them.
Yeah, so this one has some decent ideas. I don't think it's a particularly great story. I don't think it's a particularly good story. Again, I don't think it's a bad story, but it just is. There's so many other Tom Baker stories I'd rather spend my time with. But hey, that's just me. If you have a different opinion or maybe a different experience with this one, definitely let us know. Leave a comment below. It's always fun to see, because I've seen, on Twitter, for instance, I've seen someone on Twitter say, hey, it's a really good story, rated a 5 out of 5. I just don't see it that way, but I'm always interested to see other people's opinions on this. And actually, that's a good segue to the fact that we do have a Twitter. If anybody wants to follow, it's at Brothers Mahoney.
Yeah, we post
occasionally.
Well, we're trying to post more. Neither of us are big Twitter people. That's part of the problem. Among the things we do is every Thursday we post some big fitness stuff we pick up. We're just getting into big fitness. We like to support, what we're getting into. So we pick up some big fitness things. We post about that. We post our opinions on what other Doctor Who thing we happen to be watching at the time. And, it's just, a nice way to stay in touch with us if you have any, questions about what we think about something. Especially something new Who that we're not going to get to in a while. That would be the best place to find information out.
Yeah, just a nice casual fun. Yeah, so Out of interest, James, what do we have next?
Well, what's next actually fits in quite well because it is a Big Finish thing. The 7th of the main range of Big Finish from 2000, the Genocide Machine, starring Sylvester McCoy as the 7th Doctor, of course, and Sophie Aldred as the always lovely Ace. Although she'd probably kick me if they called her lovely, now that I think about it. The always fun Ace. So that's fun. And apparently Daleks as well. So that's going to be fun. The 7th Doctor is enjoyably enough on audio, and I look forward to what Sylvester McCoy brings to the role now.
Yeah, and this, I believe, is the first audio we've listened to that brings back like a pre-existing antagonist.
That has to be correct, yeah.
So yeah, that should be fun. I mean, Daleks toys naturally throughout Classic Who and New Who are up and down. Some of them are really good. Some of them are a bit more.
The Daleks.
Yeah, some of them are a bit more drab. But the Daleks are, well, they're one of the most famous, most well-known antagonists of Doctor Who. So it should be fun to see them in audio. Well, hear them in audio form. I can already hear the Exterminate coming my way.
And I look forward to that as well.
Anyhow, we have been the Brothers Mahoney. Naturally, I am Michael.
And I'm James.
And we appreciate you listening. Have yourself a pleasant day.